I am Lisa, 28 years old, a venture capital fund manager based in Spokane, Washington. That Christmas dinner, I had prepared a roast recipe Mark, my husband, had always loved. I was planning to bring it to my parents' house just like every year. Even though Mark had passed away in April in a car accident, I still wanted to hold on to something for myself. A moment of remembrance. A piece of us. But as I stepped into the living room, in the soft glow of Christmas lights, my mother, Isabella, avoided my gaze, and my father, Michael, just pressed his lips together. They didn't let me finish my sentence before awkwardly saying, "Maybe I shouldn't come this year." The reason? Sadie, my younger brother James's fiancée, didn't want me there. She felt that having a widow around would ruin the festive mood. I tried to smile, as if I hadn't just heard what was said. I asked just once, calmly, "I only want to make Mark's favorite dish. It's the first Christmas without him." My father scratched his head, then said bluntly, "Sadie says her family has a tradition of avoiding bad luck during the holidays." I nodded, looking around this house, from the walnut dining set I bought them, to the remodeled kitchen paid for with the savings Mark and I had scraped together. Every corner of this place bore my fingerprints, since I'd helped them buy the house 5 years ago. I smiled, said nothing more, stepped outside, and zipped up my coat. In the car, I opened my banking app and immediately canceled the $2,800 monthly auto transfer paying off the mortgage for the house they live in. I had been silent for too long. And that Christmas Eve, in the biting cold of Spokane, amidst the twinkling lights glowing from strangers' windows, I knew I had done the right thing. Not out of anger, but because I had finally stopped sacrificing for people who never truly saw me as family. I sat alone in my quiet apartment, the cup of coffee in my hand long since gone cold. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "Sadie says it's best you don't come." And my mother added, "She just wants a happy Christmas." They spoke as if I were some ominous shadow, something that shouldn't exist, simply because I had lost the man I loved. The house they lived in, Mark and I paid the down payment. The oven my mother bragged about to her friends was a birthday gift from me. The Italian leather sofa in the living room? I bought it to match her exact taste. Everything in that house was a testament to a love they now wanted to erase because it didn't fit the holiday mood. I remembered every late night when Mark was still alive, planning how we'd help my parents with their credit card debts, with upgrading their furniture, with my mother saying she was embarrassed if guests saw how outdated the house looked. I had refinanced my own apartment just to come up with enough money, and now, with Mark gone, they treated me like an emotional burden. When I asked, "So where am I supposed to have Christmas dinner?" my father, without meeting my eyes, said, "Maybe you can go to Aunt Rosa's, or we can meet up after the holidays." A gentle rejection, but one that made it crystal clear where I stood in this so-called family. I didn't cry. I just felt empty. As empty as a chair not added to the table. And right then I realized I had been living in an illusion of kinship, one I had funded entirely myself. I sat in the car for a few more minutes, engine off, ignoring my phone. The name Isabella flashed on the screen, but I didn't pick up. I didn't want to hear another excuse. Christmas lights from nearby homes shimmered through the windshield, flickering like memories mocking me. I thought of every expense. Every time my mother messaged, "The coffee machine's broken. I want that new $1,500 Breville one." I'd sent the money in 3 minutes, without a word of complaint. I remembered when they needed to fix the roof. I canceled a vacation in Oregon just to wire over the $12,000 to the contractor. Over the past 5 years, $237,468 had moved from my account into their lives. Not a number I used to keep track of, but a measure of the trust I once placed in what I thought was family. They didn't know I had to cancel therapy because I couldn't afford it. They didn't know I sold my shares in my first startup just to help them through a financial crisis. And when I asked, Can I come to Christmas dinner? I was treated like a dark cloud to be cast away. In the silence, I opened my banking app and reviewed every transfer. $168,000 had gone toward their mortgage, $2,800 every month for 5 years. I had lived like an emotional ATM. And in that moment, for the first time, I wasn't hurt by their rejection anymore, but by the realization that my kindness had been twisted into obligation. That evening, just as I set down my bag and turned on the light in my small apartment, the phone rang again. This time it was Sadie. I hesitated, but then I picked up. Lisa, I think you misunderstood. Her voice was sweet, like artificial syrup, but there was a thin veil of arrogance underneath. I didn't mean to offend, it's just, my parents are a bit superstitious, and honestly, I also felt a bit uncomfortable having a widow at the dinner table. I stayed silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was trying to keep my anger from boiling over. Sadie went on, her voice soft but laced with control. My family has a tradition of celebrating, not mourning, during the holidays. I just don't want any negative energy at the table. I exhaled lightly. You mean negative energy as in the presence of someone who just lost her husband? Sadie let out a small laugh, utterly unfazed. That's not what I meant. But your husband wasn't exactly the right fit for my family. I mean, he was just a software engineer, right? And my family, well, we're used to a different circle. I felt my blood freeze in my veins. She had just insulted my dead husband, the man who stayed up nights fixing system bugs so hospitals wouldn't crash during a pandemic. I kept my tone even. Are you saying my husband was beneath you? Sadie didn't answer directly, just sighed. I just think you should know your place. Like your husband did. He never tried to climb into our social tier. And that sentence, that condescension, was the final straw. I sat upright, my voice steady. Thank you for making things so clear. From now on, I won't consider you, Michael, or Isabella as family. I hung up, my hand still gripping the phone. Inside, I wasn't angry anymore, just strangely relieved. Like I had just set down a suitcase I'd carried for years. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to be pleasant to people who didn't deserve it. After Sadie's call, I sat in my apartment, the warm yellow lights failing to thaw the chill inside me. I opened my laptop and scrolled through old emails, receipts, invoices, half-hearted thank you messages from my mother. Each line a reminder of the years I believed generosity would buy me love. But now they looked like chains. I stood up and pulled out a folder from the cabinet. Bills, transfer confirmations, the pieces of Elisa who always said, "It's okay, I'll take care of it." I carried them to the fireplace. One by one, the papers caught flame, the fire licking across the numbers, turning them to ash. No alarm bells, no confirmation pop-ups, just silence. But it was the most beautiful silence I'd ever heard. I made myself a cup of coffee with the old chipped machine, sat and watched the fire, and for the first time in years, I didn't check my banking app. No more anxiety over the next payment. No more wondering if I'd done enough for family. That night, I slept soundly, without dreams, without being woken by demanding texts. Maybe this was the first Christmas I truly lived for myself, not for anyone else, but because I had chosen to lay down a burden I no longer wished to carry. Two days later, while I was mopping the kitchen floor, a task I often did to stay calm, the phone rang. Sadie. I wasn't going to answer, but something told me I should. Her voice came through, the same sickly sweet tone that somehow felt even more grating. Lisa. You're free today, right? My parents, Tom and Helen, are landing at Spokane Airport at 3:40 p.m. They don't know the area, so could you pick them up? I froze for a few seconds, thinking I must have misheard. But no. She was genuinely asking me to drive nearly 40 minutes in freezing weather to pick up her parents, like I was their family chauffeur. "Why can't you go?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Sadie laughed. "James and I are busy setting up for the party. Besides, you've got the time, and you're trying to make things right with everyone, aren't you?" I didn't respond. In my mind was the image of my mother standing in that kitchen, telling me I shouldn't come for Christmas because I was bad luck. And now, my brother's fiancé thought I'd still be willing to serve them, after all they'd said and done. "Fine," I said. "Send me the flight details." Sadie sounded satisfied. "Knew you'd help. Oh, and don't be late. They hate waiting." I hung up without another word. And that afternoon, instead of heading to the airport, I sat on my sofa, wrapped in a blanket, eating pasta and watching an old movie Mark had always loved. My phone buzzed non-stop, missed calls from Sadie, from unknown numbers, probably Tom's. Then came a string of angry texts. "Lisa, where are you? They're waiting outside the airport in the cold." Followed by accusations, insults, even name-calling. I didn't respond. I put the phone down and turned back to the screen. In a world where I had always been the one to sacrifice for others, that afternoon, I chose to be an ordinary person, allowed to say no. And never before had my absence spoken so loudly. I woke up the next morning in a quiet apartment, no phone ringing, no knocks at the door, and of course, no thank you messages, because I hadn't gone to the airport, as they had expected. On the kitchen counter, my phone lay silently next to a still warm cup of herbal tea. I unlocked it. 3 missed calls from Sadie, 2 voice messages from Helen, a long message from Tom filled with complaints. Irresponsible, uneducated, left elderly people waiting in the snow. I read them all, but didn't reply. Not because I wanted to provoke them, but because I knew, if I texted back, I'd once again fall into the role of peacemaker, explainer, the one who apologizes for not meeting other people's expectations. I wasn't that woman anymore. Instead, I brewed a small pot of coffee, added a touch of cinnamon like Mark used to love, and chose my favorite blue ceramic bowl for oatmeal and berries. On the TV, I played soft jazz, letting the sound of a saxophone fill the apartment. In that moment, I realized I was living an ordinary day. Not because someone needed something from me, but because I got to choose how to start my morning. That afternoon, I took a walk around the neighborhood, stopped by the local organic market, bought a few bunches of kale and a block of good cheese, the kind I used to skip because I thought, I have other responsibilities. That evening, I cooked myself a simple dinner: lemon pasta, arugula salad, and a glass of red wine. I ate alone, in silence, with no one urging me to video call the whole family, no one asking me to swing by and fix the plumbing or pick up a new cookware set. At sunset, I stood by the window, watching the sun dip behind rows of aging brick buildings, feeling lighter. Maybe freedom wasn't something grand, but simply the ability to say no and still feel peace as the door closes behind you. Around 3 p.m. the next day, while I was trimming a few dried lavender stems on the balcony, the doorbell rang. Repeatedly, impatiently. I walked over and glanced through the peephole. There stood Sadie in the center, flanked by Tom and Helen. The 3 of them looked like an angry delegation from an old world where others were expected to bow to unspoken rules. I opened the door, saying nothing. Sadie immediately raised her voice. "Do you know my parents had to stand outside the airport for almost an hour? In winter, in the cold, in a chaotic crowd. Who do you think you are?" I remained still, my eyes never leaving her flushed face. Tom stepped in, his voice low and firm. "You're not just irresponsible. You lack moral decency. People like you shouldn't be respected in the financial world. I know plenty of folks in the funding circuit. You want to lose every opportunity in this region?" I tilted my head slightly. My voice wasn't loud, but every word landed with weight. "Thanks for the reminder," Because I also have plenty of evidence showing who's been ungrateful to the person who once supported them. And, more importantly, who shamelessly insulted my late husband. Helen scoffed. "Stop playing the victim. You're just blowing everything out of proportion." I nodded gently. "Is that so? So calling me bad luck, expecting me to be a personal chauffeur for your parents, and now dragging all three of you to my doorstep seems perfectly appropriate, doesn't it?" Sadie exploded. "You're selfish, petty, and vindictive." I didn't react. I simply opened the door a little wider, looking at them one by one. "This is my home. No one has the right to come here and insult me or issue commands. If you don't leave now, I'll report your behavior to building management as harassment." Tom took half a step forward, but I raised my hand, an invisible boundary drawn in the air. "Enough," I said. "I don't need the three of you to teach me what family means, because real family doesn't act like this." I closed the door, not with a slam, but just enough for the inside and outside air to be firmly divided. And behind that door, I stood tall, no longer trembling, because I had just done something I'd never dared to do before in my life: look straight at those who belittled me and told them they could no longer control me. 2 days after the confrontation at my doorstep, a colleague sent me a link with a message. "Lisa, what's going on? Are you okay?" I opened it. It was an article from Spokane Social, a local features outlet. The bold headline read, "Female entrepreneur abandons elderly couple amid Christmas snowstorm." The tone was part sympathetic, part outraged, describing a couple in their 60s left stranded in the freezing airport with no assistance, unable to reach family. The article didn't name me, but it clearly referenced a tech investment manager, a widow known for her writings on resilience after loss, and resident of a luxury development near Riverfront Park. Everyone in the industry knew it was me. I sat still for a moment, but then I scrolled to the final line of the article, where the author, someone named Anna Lee, thanked a trusted source from the victim's family, Mr. Tom Sanders, senior real estate advisor. I set my phone down, my throat burning. They had really done it. They had truly constructed a victim-villain narrative, casting me as the antagonist, just because I had dared to say no. I stood up, opened my laptop, and typed in Anna Lee's name. It took less than 10 minutes to trace the connection. She had previously written PR pieces for a real estate project James, my brother, was involved in with Sadie's family's business partners. The rage I felt wasn't ablaze anymore. It was a slow, steady boil. They hadn't just disrespected me, they thought I wouldn't fight back, that I'd be too scared to speak up. But they'd forgotten that I was no longer the shadow in someone else's story. I began collecting screenshots of the messages asking me to go to the airport, evidence that Tom and Helen were never abandoned in a snowstorm. Spokane had only been chilly that day with no snowfall. I combed through every social media post by Sadie, Tom, Helen, and began spotting little details they hadn't realized I'd notice. And then, when I found the caption Isabella had written under last year's Christmas dinner photo, "Thank you to my daughter for always taking care of this home," I knew I held the most powerful weapon: the truth. The truth that I had funded their house, their stability, and the polished image they used to manipulate others. This battle, they chose to start. But how it ends, that will be up to me. I started with a short list: Sadie, Tom, Helen, Isabella, Michael, James. Each name was a link in the chain that turned me into the villain in the public eye. I opened social media, scrolling through every post. On Instagram, Sadie flaunted a new Chanel bag, the caption subtly thanking family for always supporting me. On Facebook, Helen posted a photo of a gleaming pearl necklace, a gift from Michael, though I knew exactly where it came from. Tom wrote about client appreciation from a luxury resort, right around the month I was cutting personal expenses to help them. Each post was a puzzle piece, a reminder that I had once stood behind the glamour they displayed. I saved each photo, each comment, cross-referenced them with old messages and emails, not just to defend myself, but to prepare. I organized everything into a folder titled Truth for Christmas. This year's Christmas dinner, when they raise their glasses in celebration, thinking I've been silenced, I will walk in, not to ask for a seat, but to lay the truth on the table, among the silver cutlery and sparkling lights I once helped bring into their lives. I don't need an apology, I just need them to see Lisa is silent no more. I had always believed that James, though weak and easily manipulated, wasn't the one actively turning against me. But the next morning, as I reviewed the network connections between everyone in this story, something stopped me cold. On James's LinkedIn, I found a congratulatory comment from 3 months ago by someone named Anna Lee. "Congrats, James, on the new investment deal. Looking forward to collaborating again." Anna Lee, a familiar name. She was the author of the article that smeared me last week. I opened her profile. Under experience, it read, Content and Media Specialist, freelance contributor for Spokane Social and other regional platforms. But more important was her recent activity. She had participated in a series of real estate seminars hosted by the company James now worked for. One post even said, "Thanks to James and the team for sharing such a practical case study. We'll use it in my next article." There was no doubt. Anna didn't randomly choose to write about an elderly couple abandoned in a snowstorm. She didn't just happen to know where I lived, my job title, or that I was a widow. Every detail had been fed to her, with intent, by people who resented me for no longer serving them. I sat quietly for a few minutes. Not in shock, but in disappointment. James hadn't just stayed silent when I was pushed out of Christmas. He stayed silent when I was publicly slandered, and now I knew why. Because it had all been orchestrated, and perhaps with his approval. I no longer hesitated. I reopened the evidence folder on my computer and renamed it Truth for Christmas. What I had gathered these past few weeks would no longer be my shield, it would be my sword. And it would be placed on the table, just as they lifted their glasses, thinking everything had been neatly swept away behind them. I spent the entire afternoon of December 24th printing out the documents. Every sheet was a sliver of truth they never thought I'd have the courage to bring into the light. Mortgage payment receipts, bank transfer screenshots, appliance refund forms filed under my name but sent to their address. Even the invoice for last summer's Colorado vacation charged to my card, while Sadie posted a photo congratulating her future in-laws on their phenomenal investment success. I divided everything into 3 sections: finances, defamation, and evidence of ingratitude. Each section was clearly labeled, stored in a dark brown leather folder. No need for long-winded explanations. I wanted them to face the facts themselves, surrounded by silverware and crystal chandeliers I'd helped pay for. By evening, I stood before my wardrobe. I didn't pick out a flashy dress, nor anything too sharp. I wore a classic black suit, a white silk blouse underneath, and pointed heels. Not to impress, but so they'd understand. I wasn't there to ask for forgiveness. I was there to end this. I sprayed a hint of woody perfume, the kind Mark used to say, "Makes you seem like a woman who knows exactly what she wants." And he was right. I did. I wanted them to understand. I was no longer the obedient daughter, the gentle sister, or the child expected to carry the weight of family debt. I was a grown woman who had endured enough to know that silence never protects kindness. In my hand was the folder. In my mind, the words I had carefully prepared. But in my heart, there was no hatred. Only a single wish, to see the truth stand tall at the very table that once cast me out. Christmas came early in Spokane. The snow hadn't fallen yet, but the wind was so cold my hands went numb holding the folder. I paused in front of the familiar house, the one I used to call my parents' home. But today, it was just a location. Not a place to return to, but a place to end things. Inside, laughter echoed. Soft lights shimmered through the misted windows. I rang the bell. After a moment, the door opened. Isabella froze when she saw me. "Lisa?" she stammered. "Why are you—" I smiled slightly. "Merry Christmas, Mom." I stepped in without waiting for an invitation. In the dining room, most were already seated. Sadie beside James, Tom, and Helen, across from them. Michael pouring wine. Silence fell, like someone had unplugged the music. I placed the folder on the table and said clearly, "I only need a few minutes. Then I'll leave." I pulled out the first page and placed it in front of Michael. "Over the last 5 years, I've paid $168,000 toward the mortgage for this house." Then the next. "Add the other costs, coffee machine, furniture, family trips. That's $237,468 from my account." I looked at Sadie. "I also have a copy of the message you sent asking me to pick up your parents from the airport, and the fabricated article Tom helped create that painted me as irresponsible." I turned to the other guests, those who had dined here year after year, unaware who made that possible. "I don't want the money back. I just want you to know I'm not ungrateful. And I won't let others rewrite my story because they think I'll stay quiet." I stepped back, calm. "I'm Lisa, widow, investment fund manager, and the only person here who paid for this house." No one said a word. No clinking glasses. No smiles. But in that moment, among the twinkling lights and elegant table, I was finally seen. Not for making noise, but for choosing truth. I took from the folder a printed copy of the article Anna Lee wrote. The bold headline dripped with veiled cruelty, aimed at me. I held it up, passing it around. "This article came out 4 days ago. It portrays me as someone who abandoned an elderly couple in freezing conditions." I turned to Tom. "You were the source. Your name appears in the author's credits." He started to speak, but I stopped him. "I have screenshots of your messages with Anna Lee, James's close associate. This article wasn't reporting facts, it was commissioned." The room stirred. Sadie sat frozen, gripping her wine glass. I looked straight at her. "You sent me the message asking me to pick up your parents. You played sweet, then cast me as rude." Sadie stood up, voice shrill. "You're exaggerating. I didn't think you'd overreact." I stayed calm, took out my phone and played the voicemail. Her voice rang out. "Pick up my parents, please. And don't be late. They don't like to wait." Silence. I looked around. Faces shifted, from shock to discomfort to stillness. I spoke again, not just to Sadie, but to all of them. I was excluded from Christmas dinner because I was seen as bad luck, a widow. And when I stopped being a silent servant, I became the problem. And James? I turned to my brother, who had been silent, eyes down. "You knew. You knew the article was false. You knew Sadie lied. But you stayed silent." James whispered, "I didn't know it would go this far." I nodded. "But it did. And now I'm stopping it. Not with a fight. With truth." The room stayed silent. No one raised a glass. No one met anyone's eyes. And I, standing in a home that once shut me out, no longer felt small. The air in the room was thick and heavy. Sadie looked down. Tom and Helen sat stiffly. I stood tall in the silence. Then someone spoke. Aunt Lorraine, my mother's longtime friend, calm voice, furious eyes. "I can't believe I once called you the ideal daughter-in-law, Sadie. This is disgraceful." Mr. Harold, my father's former colleague, turned to Michael. "Michael, how could you let this happen? Your daughter paid for the house and you let her be pushed out of Christmas?" Michael stammered. I didn't realize it went this far." But his excuses dissolved into silence. Rachel, a young cousin from Aunt Rose's side, raised her voice. "I used to think Lisa was distant. Turns out she was just surviving in a family that gave her no place. Isabella tried to interject. We just wanted to keep things cheerful. But Lorraine snapped back. By throwing out your own daughter? I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I just looked at them. The people who once assumed I'd always be the one in the kitchen, wiring money, smiling through their selfishness. Now, their so-called allies turned against them, not because I demanded it, but because truth defends itself. I bent down, slipped the folder back into my bag, looked up one last time and said, I didn't come here to ruin dinner. I came to take back the truth I was once denied. From now on, host as many dinners as you like, but don't expect me back if the seats are still saved for lies. I walked out. No one stopped me. And when the door shut behind me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter. Because for the first time, I stood in a room full of people and didn't need anyone's permission to exist. January passed in silence. No calls from my parents. None from James. Sadie blocked me on everything. But the news came anyway. One evening in early February, a letter arrived from Mortgage Services Northwest. Borrowers, Michael and Isabella. Subject, past due, $8,400. Warning, foreclosure within 30 days if unpaid. I didn't feel vindicated, just unsurprised. I'd stopped paying on Christmas Eve. They couldn't keep up, because for 5 years, they never had to. I folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box where I kept old documents, a reminder, not of revenge, but of my escape from manipulation. Meanwhile, Tom and Helen had canceled their spring vacation. They were no longer speaking at charity events. An anonymous blog had gone viral, retelling the Christmas dinner story. Names unmentioned, but everyone knew. I didn't write it, but I didn't deny it either. Truth, when enough people want it, finds its own voice. My life slowed down. I brewed coffee in the morning, walked the park, no longer checked texts from Mom asking if her card still worked. I cleaned my apartment, replaced old bedsheets, threw out symbols of silent sacrifice. I cooked simple meals, read, sometimes looked at old photos of Mark, not to mourn, but to remind myself I could love, lose, and still survive. At the end of February, James's office emailed me. Subject, meeting, if you're willing. I read it. Closed the screen. Not because I wasn't willing, but because this time, someone else needed to wait for me. That night, I watched the city lights. And for the first time, I realized freedom isn't something grand. It's simply not having to pay for your own kindness anymore. On the last afternoon of March, as new buds peeked through the trees, I heard a knock. It was James, my brother, who once hid behind silence, now stood with honest eyes and dark circles. Hey, he said, then paused. I nodded. Come in. We sat across from each other in the living room, once a place of betrayal, now still. My hands rested in my lap, steady. James spoke slowly. I know everything now. The articles, Sadie. How Mom and Dad treated you. I was silent too long. You have every reason not to see me. I didn't speak right away. Just poured him herbal tea. Silence is a language too. After a while, I asked, why are you here? He met my eyes. Because I regret it. I let others smear the person who carried this family. I wanted to say sorry, not to get you back, just to let you know I finally understand. I looked at him, not as the baby brother always protected, but as a man finally facing truth. I nodded. I accept your apology, but forgiveness doesn't mean things go back. He nodded too. I added, if you want to rebuild this, it has to be different. No silent debts, no quiet sacrifices, no more just understand. Only respect. James smiled faintly. I understand. Before leaving, he said, Sadie's no longer with me. She said I was weak for not defending her family, but for the first time I feel proud for standing up for you. I didn't need to hear more. I'd already validated myself. That evening, I had dinner at Aunt Rosa's, her home, once my refuge. A warm, simple meal. No one asked for money, no one demanded anything. We laughed, talked. And in that little kitchen, I felt seen, not for what I'd given, but for who I was. After dinner, I stepped outside. A soft spring breeze brushed my face. I looked up at the sky, no longer cold, no longer snowing, just open and clear. Like my future, now. Calm, grounded, and completely mine. Maybe one day we all must ask, how much sacrifice does it take to be considered part of a family? And when no one stands with us, do we still have the courage to stand for truth? Lisa's story isn't one of rebellion. It's the story of someone who finally dared to set boundaries around her own kindness. If you've ever been dismissed, stayed silent to keep the peace, or hoped others would change just because you loved them enough, then maybe you'll understand Lisa's final silence as she walked away. And what about you? Where are you hearing this from? Have you ever walked away from a relationship you gave too much to? Your money, your time, your trust? Leave a comment below. Not to vent, but so we, those who've stayed quiet, know we're not alone. And if you believe stories like this should be told, should be heard, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. There are more stories waiting to be shared. Stories where, maybe one day, you'll find yourself too. Thank you for listening to the very end. See you again in another story where truth still stands, no matter how many try to bury it.